For our ethology question, we asked ourselves, how would feeding station at the Fort Wayne Zoo affect the activity among the reticulated giraffes? As a hypothesis, we decided that the giraffes would become more active while having access to the feeding station.
Reticulated giraffes belong to the Animalia kingdom and are in the chordate phylum. They are a part of the Giraffidae family and have the scientific name of a Giraffa camelopardalis. Giraffes have the order of Artiodactyla.
Before we could begin collecting data for our experiment, we had to learn some background information. Giraffes range from 14 to 19 feet tall, can run up to 35 miles per hour, and live in open herds with no leaders and are very non-territorial. They spend a lot of time foraging for food, and their long necks are used to establish dominance during mating season. Giraffes' native habitat is a semi-arid savanna and savanna woodlands southward from the country of Chad to South Africa and eastwards from the country of Niger to Somalia. They can be found in desert landscapes and mostly flat areas, so they can see the predators coming.
Some interesting facts about giraffes are that they have blue tongues that range up to 18 inches long. Giraffes are also the tallest mammals on Earth.
The materials needed for this experiment is a set of test animals, which is 4 female giraffes, a datasheet to record observations, a clock, a feeding station, and an enclosure.
The first thing that we needed to do was distinguish our 4 animals. Faye was the lightest colored and shortest giraffe. Zuri was distinguishable by her matted coat. Mystic had the darkest coat and a brown face. And then Luna was the smallest giraffe, but had black horns.
The next thing that we needed to do was record the giraffe activity as soon as they were released from the barn and the feeding station had not opened yet. We recorded any interactions between the giraffes or change in their movement.
Once the feeding station opened and the giraffes fed off of it, we recorded their activity every 30 minutes following the station interaction.
We repeated our observations for each giraffe and every 30 minutes after they fed off the feeding station, or every 30 minutes they did not come to the feeding station. We then compared the giraffes' activity levels for 30 minutes before they ate at the feeding station and for 30 minutes after they had left the feeding station. Our observations showed that the giraffes were more active after they had left the feeding station. The giraffes were more interactive and animated both at the feeding station and soon after they had left. Their activity levels were generally low before they had gone to the feeding station.
As you can see in the graph, the purple represents the activity shown after visiting the feeding station, while the green represents the activity shown before visiting the feeding station.
We had observed that the giraffes tended to take a lap around their enclosure after they had exited the station. They also did not interact with others in their enclosure very much, both before and after leaving the feeding station. Here is the data that supported our hypothesis.
The data that we collected and the observations that we made while at the zoo supported our hypothesis that while having access to the feeding station, the giraffe's activity would increase. Possible sources of error in the experiment we conducted could have been the rising temperature levels, the personalities of the giraffes, and/or the amount of food ate at the feeding station.
We cannot be certain that the spike in activity was from the food ate at the feeding station. These possible sources of error could be fixed in the future by making sure that the human feeding the giraffe and the giraffe do not interact. And also, they could be fixed by isolating the giraffe. We could run the experiment on the same giraffe more than once to prove our hypothesis even more correct.
One question that arose during our experiment was if the amount of lettuce eaten at the feeding station was what affected the spike in activity levels or the interaction between the giraffes and the humans. Another question that came up while performing our experiment was if the giraffe's activity was due to the heat or due to the food. Were the giraffes just moving to find shade, a certain favorite spot, or to be closer to one another? Or was the food the driving factor?
For our new investigation, we would change our ethology question to how does the temperature affect the activity levels of the giraffes? We would change it to this because in some cases, the giraffe only came to the feeding station once the whole time we observed them. All of the giraffes would be affected by the same temperature because they would not have a choice. This would be a better question because we would be able to get data from all 4 of the giraffes at the same time. They would not have the choice whether or not to feel the temperature, but they had the choice whether or not to go to the feeding station. For our new experiment, our hypothesis would be that the higher the temperature gets, the less activity the giraffes show. We would need the same materials as our previous experiment with the addition of a thermometer. We would collect data the same way as our previous experiment by creating a data table and recording the temperature every 30 minutes and the activity levels of the giraffes every 30 minutes. Our new investigation hypothesis and ethology question would be better because we would be able to see how the temperature affects all the giraffes at the same time.